The Joint Security Area is the only portion of the Korean Demilitarized Zone where North and South Korean forces stand face-to-face. It is often called the Truce Village in both the media and various military accounts. The JSA is used by the two Koreas for diplomatic engagements and, until March 1991, was also the site of military negotiations between North Korea and the United Nations Command. Location: the Joint Security Area is located at 37.95583 degrees north, 126.67667 degrees east, 37.95583, 126.67667, lying within the village of Panmunjom. The original village of Panmunjom encompassed a larger area than the current intermilitary complex of the JSA, and consisted mostly of farms. The JSA itself is actually about 800 meters south of where the village proper used to be, though still within the village's old farming area. It is because of this proximity that there is often ambiguity between the terms JSA and Panmunjom. Panmunjom no longer exists as an inhabited village as it was destroyed during the war, and all that now remains on the site of the village is the building constructed for the signing of the Armistice Agreement, now the North Korea Peace Museum. Residing within the North Korean half of the DMZ, the village has not been rebuilt or repopulated, but the name carries on, and the name is now used to usually refer to the JSA. The village gained lasting fame as the site where the Korean Armistice Agreement was negotiated. General Namil of North Korea and General William Harrison, Jr., of the United Nations Command signed the Armistice Agreement at 10 a.m. on July 27, 1953, in a hastily constructed pavilion at Panmunjom. General Mark W. Clark, Commander-in-Chief, UNC, later countersigned the document in a separate ceremony at Munsan, approximately 18 kilometers south of the DMZ, and Marshal Kim Il-sung, Korean People's Army Supreme Commander, along with Pen Teh-Hui, Commander, Chinese People's Volunteer Army, countersigned it at Kaesong, approximately 10 kilometers to the north, in another separate ceremony. The JSA has been the site of numerous major events since its establishment in 1953, the first of which was the repatriation of prisoners of war after the cessation of hostilities, across the Bridge of No Return. Tourism: the Joint Security Area currently has around 100,000 tourists visit each year through several tourism companies and the USO, before being allowed to enter the DMZ. If visiting from the south, tourists are given a briefing during which they must sign a document which states, in part, the visit to the Joint Security Area at Panmunjom will entail entry into a hostile area and possibility of injury or death as a direct result of enemy action. Establishment: among the provisions of the Korean Armistice Agreement signed July 27, 1953, to bring a ceasefire in the Korean War, was establishment of the Military Armistice Commission, an agency to supervise implementation of the truce terms. Meetings of MAC representatives from the United Nations Command and the Korean People's Army, Chinese People's Volunteers were held at the Joint Security Area, an 800-meter wide enclave, roughly circular in shape, bisected by the military demarcation line separating South and North Korea, and created as a neutral area, where there was free movement of both sides anywhere within the JSA boundaries. Military police of both sides provide security for the JSA with guard forces of no more than 35 security personnel on duty at any given time. The administrative facilities for both guard forces are located within the JSA layout. While the boundary has remained the same over the years, the buildings themselves have changed. Some have been removed, including all of the KPA checkpoints on the southern half of the JSA. New buildings have been constructed, whilst some existing buildings have been expanded or simply renovated. The only boundary change of the joint security area was the enforcement of the dividing line within the JSA after the murders of 2 American officers in 1976. Prior to this, the entire area was neutral, where members of either side possessed the freedom of movement within the JSA. Since the enforcement of the military demarcation line within the JSA, several UNC checkpoint buildings have also been rebuilt and/or renamed as well. Examples of this are what was called Observation Post No. 5 on the hill overlooking the Bridge of No Return is now Checkpoint Number 3, while what used to be called CP Number 3 was the UNC checkpoint at the southern end of the Bridge of No Return. After the enforcement of the MDL, however, the North Koreans no longer had a road leading into the JSA and within 72 hours built what has now become known as the 72-hour bridge or Bridge of 72 Hours. United Nations Command Staffing. The United Nations Command Security Battalion Joint Security Area was constituted on May 5, 1952, as Army Unit 8020, United Nations Command Military Armistice Commission Support Group. Originally authorized 5 officers and 10 enlisted soldiers, the unit grew to over 1,400 officers and men supporting almost 32,000 soldiers, civilians, and diplomats involved in negotiating and then enforcing the armistice agreement. By the end of February 1954, the scope of work declined and the number of soldiers assigned to the unit declined as well. For the next 50 years, the unit underwent several organizational and name changes. Although the original mission to secure the joint security area remains the same today as it was in 1952. On June 11, 1979, the name was changed from U.S. Army Support Group to United Nations Command Support Group Joint Security Area, and further changed to United Nations Command Security Force Joint Security Area on December 23, 1985. On October 15, 1994, UNC Commander directed that the unit be known by its present designation, the United Nations Command Security Battalion, Joint Security Area. Originally a purely U.S. Army organization, the unit also included ROK soldiers. In addition, ROK Army officers served as liaison officers. In the mid-1970s, the JSA consisted of the JSF Company with 3 platoons of 1 U.S. and 1 ROK officer and 30 enlisted men, supported by a battalion staff. The 3 platoons were led by the U.S. officer with the ROK officer as the executive officer and U.S. Army platoon sergeants. The platoons consisted of 3 squads, with the equal numbers of U.S. and KAT-USA soldiers. Sometime after 1979, another platoon was added to the JSF to allow time for training during platoon work rotations. In July 1987, the 4 platoons of the Joint Security Force Company were reorganized to mix KAT-USA and U.S. soldiers at all levels. At the platoon level, 2 platoons were led by U.S. Army lieutenants and ROKA platoon sergeants, and 2 were led by ROKA lieutenants and U.S. Army platoon sergeants. In November 1987, the unit received a ROK Army major as its first deputy commander. On April 25, 1992, the JSF Company became a KAT-USA pure formation. Captain Yinsung HWN became the first ROK commander, assisted by U.S. Army lieutenant as his executive officer. The number of U.S. Army personnel assigned to the unit fell below 200 for the first time since 1952. American forces assigned to the JSA assumed mainly administrative and support roles. On October 31, 2004, a ROK Army battalion assumed sole responsibility for the Joint Security Area. This modified light infantry battalion consists of a battalion headquarters, a headquarters company, 2 security companies, and a civil affairs company. The number of U.S. personnel assigned decreased further, reflecting the UNC commander's desire to minimize the USFK presence near the Korean Demilitarized Zone. The commander of the ROKA JSA battalion serves as the UNCSB JSA deputy commander. The UNCSB JSA commander's principal responsibility now lies in his operational control of selected ROKA formations during both armistice and wartime periods. Both sides place guards between the blue meeting houses, where the demarcation line is marked by blocks of concrete. South Korean guards in this area are armed with pistols and they stand in a modified taekwondo stance with solid facial expressions, clenched fists and sunglasses, which is meant to intimidate the North Korean guards. The South Korean guards must be at least 170 centimeters tall and have a black belt in taekwondo and judo. History and major events. Overview. During one of the initial negotiations of the armistice, agents of the KPA-CPV side went into the truce tents one night and sawed down the chair legs of the UNC delegation. The next day, when the UNC delegates arrived, they were forced to sit lower than their KPA-CPV counterparts and lost face, so they quickly left the meeting. At a later meeting, the UNC delegation brought a flag into the truce tent and set it up on the meeting table. The KPA-CPV delegation left after losing face, but showed up at the next meeting with a flag that was larger than the UNC flag. At the following meeting, the UNC delegation brought in a slightly larger flag. This kept up until a special meeting was called just to discuss the size of the flags, as they had grown too large to fit within the tents. The size of the flags within the meeting building have stayed about the same since then, with only minor changes. The KPA flag is wider than the UNC flag, but the UNC flag is longer. The KPA flag has thicker fringe around the edges of the flag, but the UNC's trim is longer. The truck at the top of the KPA flag pole is taller than the UNC truck, but the UNC's is wider. The KPA flag has a 3-tiered base while the UNC flag only has 2 tiers, but each of the tiers on the UNC base is taller than any of the tiers on the KPA flag. Being at the center of one of the world's most tense military and political fault lines, the Joint Security Area has been the site of numerous interactions between North and South, including over 750 overt acts of violence. The UNC has documented most of the violent incidents with reports and photographs which have been reported in the course of mock meetings. Countless fistfights, shouting matches, exchanges of rude gestures, and other provocations have occurred since 1953. There have also been several prisoner exchanges and other interactions. 1950s Operation Little Switch, April 1953. This operation was a test case for prisoner repatriation, one of the 4 main issues of contention during 2 years of negotiation. 605 sick, wounded, and/or injured UNC prisoners were exchanged for 6,030 sick or injured communist prisoners. Operation Big Switch, April to September 1953. Based on the success of the repatriations undertaken earlier, a general exchange of prisoners began in late April. During Operation Big Switch, prisoners were brought to Panmunjom on the banks of the Sakong River. Each prisoner was then asked if he wished to cross the river and return to his countrymen or remain with his captors. Once the choice was made, there was no turning back, hence the name Bridge of No Return. During this time, 13,444 UNC prisoners returned to UNC countries, and 89,493 KPA and CPV prisoners returned to the communist countries. In June 1953, ROC President Syngman re-released a further 25,000 KPA soldiers held in Roka camps into South Korea in an attempt to wreck the armistice negotiations. Operation Movement of Custodial Forces, India, September 2, 1953. The armistice agreement provided that non-belligerent nation would provide security forces to hold any prisoner of war who refused repatriation. India provided 6,413 soldiers for this purpose. After landing at the port of Incheon, the UNCMAC support group moved all personnel to the demilitarized zone by helicopter in a single day without incident. Operation Comeback, January 21, 1954. Approximately 23,000 KPA and CPV soldiers held in UNC prisoner of war camps refused to return to communist control. 22 UNC soldiers also refused repatriation under the provisions of the armistice. These soldiers were held for a further 6 months and interviewed by neutral observers to ensure they had not been coerced into refusing repatriation. Most KPA expatriates remained in South Korea, while the overwhelming majority of CPV expatriates traveled to Taiwan to join the nationalists. Operation Rainbow, March 1954. During this operation, the UNCMACSG oversaw the repatriation of displaced persons, expellees, and refugees from North Korea to South Korea across the military demarcation line at Panmunjom. 1960s. On August 29, 1967, at 1,645 hours, KPA soldiers armed with small arms and light machine guns attacked the United States Army Support Group advance camp. During this attack, 1 U.S. soldier and 2 ROKA soldiers were killed. An additional 12 U.S. soldiers, 9 ROKA soldiers, and 3 ROK civilians were wounded. The KPA soldiers were pursued to the MDL by U.S. soldiers from the advance camp. Following this incident, the southern boundary fence for the DMZ was relocated to a line north of the camp's perimeter. On April 14, 1968, at 2,300 hours, KPA soldiers ambushed a UNC truck transporting food and supplies to observation postulat, using small arms and automatic weapons fire and hand grenades. The KPA soldiers succeeded in stopping the truck and attempted to kill all 6 soldiers aboard. They withdrew across the MDL after killing 4 of the soldiers and wounding the remaining 2 soldiers. Operation Breacher's Boy. On December 23, 1968, Commander Lloyd M. Bucker and his 81 crewmen from Us Pueblo crossed the Bridge of No Return to freedom. They had spent the previous 11 months in captivity after their electronic surveillance ship was attacked and seized by DPRK naval forces on January 22, 1968. They were the last group of UNC personnel to cross the Bridge of No Return. Operation Temple Bell, December 1969. In December 1969, an unarmed O-23 observation helicopter strayed over DPRK airspace and was forced to land in North Korea. A crew was held for a short time, then returned to UNC control. 1970s Operation Runaway, February 14, 1970. A Korean Airlines aircraft was hijacked by a North Korean agent on December 11, 1969 and forced to divert to Sondok Airfield in Wonsan, North Korea. Aside from the hijacker, the plane carried 46 passengers and 4 crew members. 39 passengers were repatriated through Panmunjom on Valentine's Day, 1970. The remaining passengers and all crew members were held by North Korea and to date have not been permitted to return. See Korean Airlines YS-11 hijacking. On October 12, 1970, 2 KPA guards and 1 KPA officer approached a group of UNC guards. The KPA soldiers attempted to remove the MP brassard from one UNC guard. A shoving match ensued. The KPA guards disengaged, moved to the KPA Joint Duty Officer building and returned with approximately 30 KPA guards and workers, armed with shovels, clubs, and rocks. The KPA workers initiated a melee. One UNC guard was isolated from the rest, dragged between the MAC and JDO buildings, and beaten on the head with a shovel. Shortly afterward, 50 unarmed UNC guards from the UNC JDO building arrived and joined the fray and began isolating and disabling KPA guards on the UNC side of the MDL. Fighting ceased when 2 KPA guards emerged from a guard post armed with AK-47 rifles. 7 UNC guards suffered injuries, including one with a skull fracture. On March 3, 1974, a KPA officer and 2 KPA guards approached a UNC-sponsored tour at UNC Observation Post 5. The UNC escort officer prevented the KPA group from harassing the tour group, at which point the KPA officer grabbed the UNC officer's shoulder. At the same time, one of the KPA guards kicked the officer in the back and groin. Approximately 2530 KPA personnel moved to the site and isolated the UNC officer, preventing him from returning to UNC Checkpoint 4 until the UNC Quick Reaction Force arrived on scene and dispersed the KPA soldiers. After the UNC QRF departed with the injured officer, KPA guards returned, broke into Checkpoint 4 and began to vandalize the interior. The QRF redeployed to Checkpoint 4 and forced the KPA away. The KPA responded by sending approximately 100 additional soldiers to KPA Guard Post No. 7 at the west end of the Bridge of No Return. The UNC JDO arrived on the scene and prevented an escalation by proposing an immediate security officers meeting. However, upon withdrawing from the area to convene the meeting, the JDO sedan was attacked by the KPA, who broke out the windows with rocks and clubs, injuring the JDO, after which all KPA forces withdrew to the side of the bridge. Major Henderson incident. On June 30, 1975, a DPRK journalist with a history of provocative actions verbally accosted Major W. D. Henderson, the acting commander of the U.S. Army Support Group. When Major Henderson failed to respond to the verbal insults and rude gestures, the journalist struck him in the face. Rising to protect himself, Major Henderson was attacked from behind by a KPA guard, who knocked him unconscious and then stomped on his throat, crushing his larynx. UNC and KPA guards from around the JSA immediately responded, and a melee ensued. The KPA guards attempted to inflict further injuries to Major Henderson as he was evacuated. KPA guards also assaulted a UNC-sponsored newswoman, who was hit in the face. The JSF commando arrived on the scene, confronted the fighters, and ended the incident by demanding an immediate security officers meeting. Major Henderson was evacuated from the area and eventually transported to the United States for treatment and rehabilitation. Axe murder incident on August 18, 1976. North Korean guards attacked a United Nations Command Work Party which was pruning a large tree obscuring visibility between two UNC checkpoints. During the fight, Joint Security Force Company Commander Captain Boniface of the U.S. Army was killed by a North Korean guard and Lt. Barrett was killed and most of the UNC guards were wounded by the KPA using axes dropped by the fleeing work party. Operation Paul Bunyan, August 21, 1976. In response to the killing of Captain Boniface and Lt. Barrett by the KPA on August 18, the UNC commander, General Richard G. Stilwell, ordered a massive show of force to accompany the felling of the poplar tree inside the JSA. The tree had been the focal point of the murders. In 1977, a U.S. CH-47 helicopter on patrol over the DMZ strayed into North Korean territory and was shot down. A crew, 3 dead, 1 alive, were repatriated. 1980s Soviet defector incident on November 23, 1984, during a communist-led tour. Soviet citizen Vasily Matuzik suddenly dashed across the military demarcation line into South Korea. 30 KPA soldiers pursued him, firing the weapons as they did so. The JSF, commanded by Captain Bert Mizusa, were deployed from Camp Kitty Hawk to safeguard Matuzik and repel the North Koreans. The KPA soldiers, who were pinned down by fire from the JSF's 4th Platoon on guard duty in Panmunjom, were quickly outmaneuvered and isolated in the area of the Sunken Garden, now the site of the Unification Monument. In the 40-minute firefight that ensued, Corporal Jang Myong-ki was killed, and Private First Class Michael A. Burgoyne was wounded. The JDONCO negotiated a ceasefire that enabled the North Koreans to withdraw, but not before 5 of them were wounded and 3 killed, plus an additional 8 captured. It has been rumored that Lt. Pak Chul was one of those killed in this firefight, though documentation has not been found yet. However, he has not been seen in the JSA since this incident. Additionally, there were gunshots in the north approximately 20 minutes after the ceasefire was effective, and it was reported by senior members of the NNSC to the JSF commander that the KPA commander and one of his key subordinates were summarily executed. The KPA commander was likewise never seen again. However, no evidence is adduced for these claims. Chinese Joint Duty Officer defection. On July 29, 1989, a Chinese Army officer and his wife defected to South Korea. Maj Zhaozuka and his wife crossed the demarcation line from North Korea at Panmunjom. This was the first Chinese officer to defect to South Korea through Panmunjom since the Korean War. 1990s KPA abandonment of the MAC meetings. March 1991. In March 1991, the UNC commander appointed a South Korean general as chief representative, as North Korea claims that only signatories to the armistice agreement, of which South Korea is not a part, can be representatives. They refused to attend any more MAC meetings. Operation Popeye, February 1, 1994. In January 1994, 2 KPA soldiers were swept into the East China Sea. They were rescued by elements of the ROK Navy. Neither soldier wished to defect, so they were returned to communist control through Panmunjom. Operation Bobby Hall, December 29, 1994. In December 1994, an unarmed O-58 Kiowa helicopter from the U.S. Army crossed the MDL while undertaking a low-altitude flight over hilly, wooded terrain in South Korea. KPA Air Defense Forces shot the aircraft down as it was returning to South Korean-controlled territory. Co-pilot David M. Hilleman was killed, but pilot Bobby Hall was released 13 days late after signing an apology for accidentally straying into North Korean airspace. 2010s In August 2010, South Korean Rev. Han Sang-ryul, who had entered and stayed in North Korea for 2 months in order to promote his cause of Korean unification, was arrested by South Korean authorities after returning to South Korea through the Joint Security Area. In March 2012, South Korean unification activist Roh Soo-hui entered North Korea in order to promote his cause of Korean unification. In July, he was arrested by South Korean authorities after returning to South Korea through the Joint Security Area. Gallery